Two separate visits to Saudi Arabia, just a few months apart, couldn't have been more different. When U.S. President Joe Biden arrived in the kingdom back in July, the mood was somber, with less pageantry than his predecessor had received. And Biden's visit paled in comparison to the lavish welcoming ceremony Chinese President Xi Jinping was given after arriving in Riyadh on Wednesday for a three-day visit. On just his third foreign trip since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic 3 years ago, Chinese President Xi met both the Saudi king and crown prince. The two countries earlier had signed dozens of deals worth $30 billion, covering green energy, technology, and construction. Xi later attended a specially arranged summit with Arab and Gulf leaders, which China's foreign ministry described as an epoch-making milestone. China, which is Saudi Arabia's largest trade partner, also counts the kingdom as its biggest supplier of oil. Beijing is also increasing its security ties with Riyadh, a role that Washington has played for decades. So is China working to become the new dominant player in the Gulf, and how will the U.S. respond? And to further discuss President Xi's visit to Saudi Arabia, joining me now from St. Gallen, Switzerland, is Guido Cozzi. He is a full professor at HGS's School of Economics and Political Science. And from Bangkok, James Dorsey. He is a senior fellow at the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Let's begin with the significance of this visit. Guido, is this a milestone in the history of China-Arab ties?
Well, obviously, China badly needs oil from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia badly needs China's money. And China is Saudi Arabia's best customer. So I would say it is simply normal business that the two leaders join, also because it is a very imperfectly competitive market. So bilateral bargaining is very important. And China has many things to put on the table, including foreign direct investment, Belt and Road Initiative, and more. Mm-hmm. So that there are opportunities to mutually gain from trade.
So, James, when compared to U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to the kingdom, what kind of a message were the Saudis sending, do you think, and how they gave much more warm welcoming to the Chinese president?
I don't think this is simply about the Saudis sending a message. Obviously, Xi Jinping was welcomed with far more pomp and circumstance than Joe Biden was, given that the relations between, particularly between Biden and Mohammed bin Salman, are not very good, whereas they are very good with Xi Jinping. I think the significance is that the Chinese, on the one hand, are exploiting strains in the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia, but at the same time, they're actually sending the same message to the United States that the Saudis are sending and that other Gulf states are sending. And that message is that there is agreement that the United States is the security guarantor of the region. What the Chinese want, given that their major oil and gas imports come from the Middle East, what the Chinese and the Saudis want is a clear definition of what the U.S. commitment to security in the Middle East is, and preferably a formalization of that commitment.
So, Guido, China's president is not only meeting with the Saudi crown prince, but other Gulf and Arab leaders as well. How significant is this, and is China expanding the scope of its relations with Arab and Gulf countries?
Absolutely. The MENA region is very important to China. So it is finally for China, Xi Jinping is traveling again. So it is very important to meet in person and to establish more relationships there, including relationships related to the Belt and Road initiatives.
Mm. So how do you think these regional countries are positioning themselves? For example, are there wary of getting caught up in the U.S.-China rivalry?
Well, it is a very complex scenario. Obviously, it is very hard to ask countries in the Middle East or North Africa to sacrifice their economic interest and in order to join Biden's battle of democracies versus autocracies. Of course, in the case of King Salman, he would lean more on the autocratic side. But also other countries that are more in the middle are looking for a more peaceful and cooperative and synergic approach rather than being torn between two superpowers, one established and guaranteeing security at the moment, the other rampant and with much more growth prospects in the future.
So, James, what are your thoughts on that? Would other countries, regional countries, follow suit in deepening ties with Riyadh, and how would that play out when it comes to the U.S. interests in the region?
The region has made very clear that its economic future is with China. Mm-hmm. Its security future is with the United States. Now, the interesting thing about the Middle East is that if the United States is seeking a relationship with China that is on the one hand competition, but on the other hand cooperation, no other region lends itself better for that than the Middle East. The friction points are threefold. They're nuclear, in terms of nuclear development in the Gulf. They are military in terms of military cooperation, and they are technology. The problem there is that if the United States wants more buy-in into U.S. concerns, particularly on technology, the give is going to have to be in terms of bridging the gap in confidence with regard to the reliability of the United States as a partner.
So you've just mentioned, but Guido, Saudi Arabia has signed a memorandum of understanding with China's tech giant Huawei. How significant is that, given the U.S. has warned most of its allies and partners not to use Chinese companies' technology over fears of spying? So what does that mean?
Well, I don't think China is really perceived as a military threat. So I don't think these countries are really scared of China. And also Xi Jinping at the moment doesn't want to stress that at all. So as also it was mentioned, they are trying to enhance technology and cooperation. But I don't think they are at all sensitive to Biden's warnings to any level comparable to Europe, for example.
Mm-hmm. So, James, unlike the U.S., China maintains close ties with Saudi Arabia's chief rival, Iran. And in a joint statement, China and Saudi Arabia have agreed to ensure the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program and called for Tehran to respect its neighbors. So how significant is that China's president is saying this publicly about Iran?
Well, I think it's significant in terms of let's keep in mind that China is part of the P5+1, the group that was negotiating the revival of the nuclear agreement with Iran. The Chinese have always been in favor of a peaceful development of Iranian nuclear energy and adherence to the 2015 international agreement that curbed what Iran could do with its nuclear capabilities. Mm-hmm. So I think what the Chinese are doing here is trying to reassure the Saudis on the one hand, but also saying to the Iranians that they do want this agreement to be revived.
So, Guido, what do you think? I mean, could that complicate ties between Riyadh and Beijing down the line?
Well, as long as we are only talking about economic cooperation, with Iran and with different other players, it shouldn't. However, of course, as soon as China tries to overpass that limit, the pure economic relationship, then I think Riyadh would then go back to the United States.
So how do you, James, think the Crown Prince is balancing his country's relations with the U.S. and China? Can we say he's kind of moving away from the U.S., or is the nature of the U.S.-Saudi relations, which are based on oil for security, are set to change?
Well, first of all, I think it's a fallacy to think that the relationship with Saudi Arabia today is based on energy. It's not. The United States has multiple other interests. Keep in mind that you just have to look at a map to understand that there is no Indo-Pacific strategy without the Arabian Sea. That's leaving aside Saudi Arabia's importance as a leader in the Muslim world and various other, its financial muscle. So the United States has significant interests. The Saudis have made clear that they want to diversify their international relations. Nobody's questioning the economic relationship with China. This is about trying to balance that relationship with the United States and get it more clearly defined.
But although never publicly announced, Guido, China and Saudi Arabia have been exploring the possibility of pricing some oil sales to China in the Chinese currency, the yuan. What are the prospects for that? And if they did use yuan, what would be the geopolitical ramifications?
Well, this is very important. At the moment, the yuan is not an important reserve currency, but in the future, it may happen. So if we take the OECD forecast in 25 years, in a quarter century, the GDP of China will be almost twice that of the United States. So it would be like the Eurozone and the United States combined. So it is possible that in the longer run, the yuan renminbi becomes a reserve currency. And so it is possible that this is kind of inevitable. At the same time, we must also remember that while politically allied to the United States, Saudi Arabia has engaged in an oil price war in 2014 with the United States targeted to the shale oil industry that effectively had to nearly shut down. So there are complex economic aspects that make Saudi Arabia more careful in maintaining good ties with China and looking the United States less as a customer and more as a competitor.
So, James, last question. Can Xi's visit to Saudi Arabia be construed as his endorsement of Crown Prince bin Salman's claim to the leadership of the Middle East?
I think there's no doubt about that. Keep also in mind that the Saudis and the Chinese have multiple common interests, including the Saudi endorsement of the crackdown on Turkic Muslims in Xinjiang, which serves the Saudis' purpose and also the Emirati purpose in terms of their opposition to political Islam.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.